Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. Let's get started. We have a jam-packed programme for you this morning. Can we confirm that you can see my screen all right? Thank you, Joe. So enormous good morning to everybody. Thank you for giving over some of your Saturday to be here. Just to be sure we're all in the right place, this is the Association for Language Learning Decolonised Secondary Languages Curriculum Special Interest Group, and this is our inaugural symposium for all language educators who are concerned with moving towards shared understandings about why and how we create curricula that seek to give teachers and their learners wider perspectives. This event is being very kindly hosted online by our partners at the Institute of Languages, Cultures and Societies. We'll share a link to our partners at the Institute of Languages, Cultures and Societies for you in the chat. Just enormous thank you for being generous with your time this morning. As discussed, we have a really jam-packed programme for you, so we're going to keep to time, hopefully. As you may have guessed from the diversity of professional contexts that are kind of represented on the programme, you're going to hear from teachers, classroom experts at all stages of their career, teacher educators and academics who are working collaboratively to make advancements in this area. And I think that's what's quite unique about this symposium, the collaborative aspect of it. Teachers, classroom practitioners, and academics working together to make meaningful advancements in anti-racism, decolonised curriculum, grounded in practice. We hope that colleagues, you in the room, will feel seen, inspired, perhaps emboldened and supported by the content of the presentations. And I know it's a time of renewed attention to our curricula in light of the new GCSE specifications, and not least, a sense of potentially shifting discourses on the horizon in the UK in general. So just a small background about our group. All of the speakers you will hear from today are members of the Decolonised Secondary Languages Special Interest Group. That's a mouthful. Our group was founded in 2021, and it's a space that is dedicated for language educators from all sectors to explore the issues of race and racism and how it shows up within our subject. I think I confidently speak on behalf of the group members when I say I don't think any of us position ourselves necessarily as the experts with all of the answers here. Rather, we're a group of professionals grounded in practice and committed to the strengthening of narratives around race, racism, anti-racism and decolonising languages education. We have half-termly online meetings, and they are a buzzy, exciting forum to discuss recent policy developments, share practice and mobilise advancements in our subject. If following the discussions you are following or during the discussions today, you'd like to join us and contribute to this work of learning and developing, please do email the address that's on this slide, and we'll share that link as well as the link to our webpage in the chat. So a brilliant feature of today's symposium is the sketchnoting, which is carried out by ALL's own Lisa Stevens and Claire Seacombe, who are both on the call. As a follow-up, Lisa is kindly, Lisa, I should have said I'm Lisa Panford. Lisa Stevens is kindly offered to run a short workshop online for anyone who's interested in learning about sketchnoting. That session will explore why you might sketchnote and its applications in language teaching and learning, as well as giving ideas about the practicalities. It's a free event and relevant to all. I'm super excited to say that the sketch notes from today will be shared with all of the delegates. So it will be on the ALL website, which means that you can sit back, enjoy or sit forward, enjoy the discussions without worrying too much about note taking. So we're hoping to make this experience as interactive as possible. We have some guidelines that we can use to ensure that these conversations are respectful and inclusive. We would encourage you to be prepared for the conversations to arouse a range of deep thoughts and perhaps emotional reactions. We would ask you to listen respectfully, be open and curious, but also to pay attention to your own emotional well-being. Since you may, of course, be triggered by some of the conversations, please do take some time out from the conversation should you need to, and perhaps think about the support that you can access after the discussion if you need to. That being said, as Kubota puts it most eloquently, part of the challenge of exposing racism in the field of languages education is that it's an uncomfortable position. And so I think part of the guidelines for this morning is for us to encourage you to lean into the discomfort today. We're all here to make meaningful advancements. Please, a sort of note about the recording and interaction. Please do put your questions to the speakers in the chat, or you can raise your hand during the Q&A portions. So the Q&A portions will be led by our co-chair, Melina Irvin. And so you'll be able to ask questions then. I should say that our symposium is being recorded, but the Q&A portions of the morning will be edited out in the recording. And then that full recording will appear on the Institute for Languages, Cultures and Societies website. And we'll share a link to that with you. At the end of this morning's sessions, we'll ask you to kindly share some of your reflections and key learning anonymously, and just spend a couple of minutes doing that. Without further ado, to open today's conference, it is my absolute privilege now to please hand over to Kerry Bevan for her keynote lecture on Dilemmas and Opportunities, Perspectives on Decolonising Secondary Languages. Thanks so much, Kerry.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm just trying to share and it's decided to not do very much. Can you see?
We can see your screen.
But I'll swap it. It's in the wrong. Can you give us a shout if that works, Lisa?
That's perfect now.
Brilliant. Oh, bore da pawb a chroeso mawr I chi gyd. Good morning and a warm welcome to you all. It really is wonderful to see you all virtually on a sunny Saturday morning as a community of language educators coming here to this space to consider and reflect upon bringing about change in our language teaching. My name's Kerry Bevan and I'm a senior lecturer in initial teacher education at Cardiff Met, where I lead PGC languages. I've been a teacher of French and German for over 27 years, and I still teach German on a part-time basis. Thank you ever so much, Lisa, for the warm welcome. I am completely humbled at being asked to speak today on this theme. And just to make you aware that the findings I present are grounded in my research around student MFL teachers and their emerging perceptions of decolonising the curriculum. I'd like to thank them, first of all. Some of them are in this virtual space today, for their support in that research. And I'd also like to thank again Lisa for her support in today's talk and for inviting me here. I appreciate that amongst our audience, we have a wide range of experiences, not only in terms of understanding decolonising the secondary languages curriculum, but also in terms of lived experiences. I, as a middle-class white woman from a working-class background, have no lived experience of racism, but I'm fully aware of the privileges my whiteness has given me. But as Dr. Dori Chetty said, the responsibility for confronting racism and white privilege does not lie solely with minority students and lecturers. We all have a role to play, no matter how big or small. And the toll of this work cannot lie with those whose narratives have been shaped and continue to be shaped by racism. I'd like to just spend a few minutes, because we use the word decolonising the curriculum frequently. I just want to spend a few minutes exploring this. So the current movement to decolonising the curriculum has its roots in a long history of activists, writers, philosophers, students and academics. But most recently, critical examination of the dominance of the European Western canon was taken up and driven forward by the student body in higher education, with movements such as the Rhodes Must Fall movement of 2015, and also the UCL movement of Why Is My Curriculum White? These student campaigns challenged the content of what was being taught, what was being left out of the curriculum, who was teaching it and how, and which students had access to knowledge and how were they being assessed. Interpretation of decolonising the curriculum isn't, however, a very simple or unified process, and it does differ across the globe, depending on how countries were colonised, how they were ruled, and how they subsequently became independent. If we take, for example, the Kenyan author Ngugi, decolonisation of the curriculum is about Africans defining themselves in relationship with others in the universe and establishing African teaching and learning at the heart of the curriculum. If we turn to Canada, from their perspective, much of the focus on decolonising the curriculum is on the genocide of Indigenous communities in residential schools and the inclusion of the history and narrative of the Indigenous population in the curriculum. In a similar vein, decolonisation of the curriculum for the Indigenous people of Australia and New Zealand is also about allowing space for the Indigenous knowledge and narrative to be reflected and included alongside others. Very interesting development in the New Zealand curriculum is the Maori curriculum, whereby it is not translated from the English. It is a separate curriculum, completely bespoke to the knowledge and narrative of that group of people. For us in the UK, decolonising the curriculum is understood as perhaps uncovering what has been hidden or erased and making this knowledge visible. The knowledge that I'm talking about is the white Eurocentric knowledge, which has dominated thinking for over 500 years. And it's this knowledge that which shapes our curriculum today. And it's this knowledge which we as teachers share with our learners. As Kalwant Bhopal so recently wrote in her book, Race and Racism in Education, and I'll just read the citation there, what children learn at school has a significant impact on how they view the world. Decolonisation is important because it ensures that children are able to see all ethnic minority groups represented in a positive way and to understand the contribution that they've made to the UK. Teachers must consider their own teaching and examine the impact of colonialism on students and their learning. So the knowledge that we share with our learners needs to be examined critically, and we should be asking ourselves questions such as what counts as knowledge, who and how is it produced, and what and who are absent. We do need to challenge the colonial legacies of white privilege, which may underpin our knowledge and which may have become internalised. I just want to share with you some literature. So if we move on to that, there is absolutely no shortage of literature on decolonising the curriculum. If we look at higher education, if we look at initial teacher education, if we look at race and racism in education, both within our secondary, across the globe, but also within TESOL. However, there is a paucity of literature on decolonising our secondary languages curriculum in the UK. That said, I just want to share three themes that did emerge when I did my literature review. So the first one is around which languages are taught. No surprise here that there is Eurocentric domination of language provision in the UK, and it's reflected in the language that we teach, with a focus on the big three, French, German and Spanish. And that's revealed in Dr. Ian Collins' annual language trends reports for both Wales and England. It would appear that some school practices reflect racial hierarchies of languages, placing greater value on languages associated with whiteness than racially minoritized language, with high culture status given to the European languages taught. A second theme which came out was around representation in teaching materials, and literature does reveal that there is evidence of stereotypical representations in secondary textbooks, online materials, assessment materials, listening materials. I just need to look at my own set text for A-level German to be faced with 4 white men, which is absolutely no reflection of the German population in 2024. Other issues that appeared around representation are specifically linked to the presentation of La Francophonie, where maps, teaching materials, again, online materials, seem to celebrate its existence. This is problematic as they fail to address the multilingual nature of these countries or even highlight the current discourse around removing French as an official language, which has so recently happened in Mali. Moreover, there's very little attempt to explain the violent history which took France to all our continents. And a final theme which emerged was around the concept of native speakers and authentic pronunciation. These are terms that we might use as language teachers, but literature reveals that our concept of a native speaker, which is all about sounding as authentic as possible, is actually associated to a monolingual white speaker, whether this be white Parisian, white Spanish from mainland Spain, or a white German speaker. So how we define and how we interpret authentic pronunciation is actually far from inclusive or representative of the global context in which languages are spoken. So with that in mind, the dilemmas I'm going to just present are again born out of the research which took place with my student teachers during their second placement at my institution. But they also are reflected in the literature that I reviewed. So the first dilemma, which was faced by the students when decolonising or when considering decolonising, was around knowledge. That's probably of no surprise. Some students described the lack of knowledge as their barrier, and it was specifically linked to literature and artistic materials from French-speaking countries outside France, whilst for others that knowledge was also grounded in history. So there were 2 different themes there. A second dilemma which the student teachers, was around time and resources. So the need for time to explore their understanding of decolonising the curriculum, but also the need for time to find, in their word, decolonised materials, but, engage in the production of materials. And that was why they required more time. A third dilemma faced by the student teachers was a feeling that the department's curricula, particularly in years 7, 8 and 9, was very restrictive. One student teacher actually described year 8 and 9 pupils as being in a rut of learning grammar and vocabulary rather than culture through the medium of these lexical features. And I think we could say that those restrictions, those structural restrictions, perhaps stretch to the GCSE and A-level syllabi. Again, perhaps no surprise that tensions between the student teacher and their school or department around the autonomy of the student teacher to decolonise curriculum content, or indeed the priority given to this work, were discussed by student teachers. Barriers from colleagues within schools have been described in other publications as pushback. And in my focus group, it was revealed that this actually leaves the student teacher feeling that their voice isn't valued. And just to quote there, we are still just PGCE students, so they felt that they had no agency in this process. There were emotional aspects to decolonising. Firstly, some students felt that they might get it wrong. They were aware that many learners had lived experiences and they didn't want to upset or offend anyone. But there also was an emotion around feeling overwhelmed by this whole process. My final point actually only emerged at the end of my research. I actually did it over a period of time, as I mentioned. There was an online questionnaire at the start of their second placement, and then we came together at the end in a focus group. And this final bit about moving away from standalone lessons only emerged then. And what they said was, we don't know how to do that in a scheme of work. So it showed that they lacked confidence and ability in moving away from standalone decolonised lessons, for want of a better word. And although it is the barrier and it is a dilemma, because student teachers felt incapable of underpinning all language teaching through a decolonising lens, I actually was delighted to see this point appear, because it actually reflected the fact that for them, they realised that decolonising the curriculum wasn't a tick box activity, and it couldn't be completed in one lesson, but it is an ongoing and iterative process. So with so many barriers, so many dilemmas, where are the opportunities? Well, I think we have to acknowledge that many of the dilemmas I present are actually interwoven, they're structural, but we can't let those stop us from doing the necessary work that we need to do, which has our learners at the core. So for me, I think that decolonising the curriculum will result in real inclusion of all learners, so that all learners can recognise themselves in the languages that we teach. I think for the learners also, it will ensure that there's a deep cultural and historical understanding of the languages we teach. And in this context, I'm suppose I'm referring to the admission that French and Spanish are global languages as the result of the policy of colonisation. And I think that decolonising the curriculum will lead us to a creative and engaging curriculum, which we know is vital for our learners. We want them to be motivated, and we know that motivation lies at the heart of their engagement with our subject. I think there are also opportunities for us too, for all of us, no matter what stage of our career. I think first and foremost, and this also was borne out in what the student teachers said, is that we need to work together, and we can work together and support each other in this work. As Lisa referred to, it's going to be challenging, and at times it is uncomfortable, but we do need to lean into that. But it will be much easier if we collaborate not only within departments, but across departments and across schools. I think as teachers and as teacher educators, I think this work affords us the opportunity to reflect, not just on our curriculum, but also on how and why we teach, and again, what's missing from our teaching. I'll just give you a very brief example from my own teaching around La Francophonie. Lisa and I have talked about this many times, and it does come from a complete desire to celebrate the global aspect of the language. There wasn't any bad intentions at its heart. But when I reflect back, I actually never explained to my learners why French is spoken across the globe. And I actually didn't think to consider how the French language was viewed from those people whose countries had been colonised. It's a long journey that we have to go on. And in the words of the South African academic Leslie Lagrange, who's written a lot around decolonising the curriculum, we do need to unlearn to relearn, and that reflection will allow the starting point of that. And I think it will also offer us professional development and personal development. We can, through decolonising the curriculum, we can learn more, we can explore new authors, playwrights, directors, singers, artists, politicians, philosophers, poets, styles of language, history too. The joy and love that we all have, which is why we've come here today, for our subject, will deepen our knowledge and understanding, and in turn that will deepen our curriculum content, and as a consequence it will have positive and real impact on our learners and their outcomes. So as I come to an end, I just want to leave you with a few thoughts as, what can you do next? What's going to be your next step on this journey? So first of all, I'd just like those of us for whom it's relevant to reflect upon your positionality. There is so much in literature to suggest that decolonising starts with yourself, with the mind, and we do need to interrogate our own perceived ideas, behaviours, values and norms. I encourage you to be bold, to interrogate the curriculum, to ask yourself what's missing, why, to reflect upon it and then change it, do something about it. Also interrogate the design of your materials, what's inside the content. Again, be critically reflective. Speak to each other, speak to your colleagues, support each other on the journey. Don't shy away from the complicated conversations. They may be uncomfortable, but they are absolutely essential. We should listen to our learners. We need to. They have so much to tell us. What are they telling you about your lesson content? Can they see themselves? Do they have the opportunity to feedback so that you can all move forward? And on that note, again, we should listen to our student teachers as they enter the profession. They have much to contribute to this discussion, and they shouldn't just feel like they're students with no agency. When you have decolonised, if that is even possible, when you've done something or you think you've done something, don't just stop there, but go back and look again. It's an iterative process. You can't just tick it off and say, I've done decolonising, I've got a scheme of work. That's not how it works. You need to keep deepening your understanding and go back and look at it again. And finally, work together. Come join us in our special interest group. Come be a member. We're all here to learn. The journey is a long one, but we will be able to support each other on that. And I just want to finish on a parting note with a quote from one of my student teachers. And I think it sort of encapsulates for me the whole work around decolonising the languages curriculum. And participant B so eloquently said, it's not just a theory, but it's something that's an actual living and breathing practice that we should be doing every day. It has to be part of what we do all the time. So thank you ever so much for listening. Thank you ever so much, Lisa, for inviting me. And again, thank you to my student teachers who form the basis of my presentation today.
Kerry, thank you so much. That was really, that you can see from the applause in the room, that was a really powerful and hopeful framing of what decolonising means. It was helpful to see it in its scholarly context and also what it means in practice through the voices of your student teachers. Thank you for sharing your research so generously. There was a lot to digest there. Please do put your comments in, or your questions for Kerry in the chat. We'll come back to those in the Q&A portion following the next session. Thank you again, Kerry, for that really hopeful presentation. And sort of to pick up on your final few points about the importance of listening to your learners, provides an absolutely brilliant segue to our next presentation. I'm going to hand over now back over to Kerry, to Ruth, Caroline, Jo, Marina, Andrea and Camilla, who are going to present on pupil voice. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Kerry, and thank you, Lisa. So yes, indeed, our team is going to pick up on the theme of listening to our learners. So when our group came together to talk about how we unpick our curricula and how we really investigate to look to see whether we are sharing the widest perspectives and whether we are giving the depth that we should be giving to really engage and include all of our learners, we came very much to the conclusion that it is absolutely essential that we talk to our learners. So my name's Caroline Conlon, and until very recently, I was Associate Professor for Languages Education at UCL IOE. And we have a colleague, and Camilla will nod, who always says it's absolutely essential that you know your learners. And another colleague who actually has embroidered on a cushion, who are your learners and what do they know? And sometimes as teachers, we perhaps feel that we know them, we've asked questions, and so we will make decisions for them. And I think this is particularly the case when we think about the curriculum. Hand on heart, how often have we engaged our learners in conversations about what they want and what they need and what they're genuinely interested in learning? So Ruth, if you wouldn't mind moving us on. I've agreed to do this in 3 minutes, everybody, because we do want to hear from the learners. So there is a lot here for you to come back to. When we think about student voice, pupil voice, learner voice, we can play with just that to begin with. We're thinking about the big picture. We're thinking about children's rights to be heard and to be listened to. And we're thinking about learners as active agents of learning. And I think this quote from Fielding is really sort of hits the nail on the head. To be an effective change agent for learning, the institution needs to put the learner at the heart of the process and listen to them. And I think when you're trying to sort of persuade others to come with you, going back to some of this work that happened in the mid-2000s, looking out for things, for example, from Ruddock, a big name in student voice, and really unpicking what that was all about, why it was important, and then linking it, bringing it forward to current conversations. So again, we're thinking about social justice, we're thinking about democracy, we're thinking about institutions as places where we construct knowledge, where we don't simply deliver, that these learners have a right to be done with rather than done unto. And so all of that, obviously, is about our beliefs and values. If you want to bring it into a more sort of recent conversation, Ruth, if you would like to move us on, we can go back to another theme that Kerry touched upon there and think about the way in which we really genuinely want to engage and motivate our learners. So a couple of motivational theories here for you to explore. So if you want to explore at a very kind of quick reference level, you can look these up on Wikipedia. If you want to go deeper, people like Steve Smith writes about motivation, and he gives the kind of overview and he gives you places you can go to read more. But if you really want to kind of get stuck in, do look up Professor Suzanne Graham at the University of Reading, who writes a great deal about motivation in languages in British secondary schools. So we're thinking then perhaps about self-determination theory. There's been a lot of focus, again, as Kerry mentioned, around competency and self-efficacy. Is our subject accessible to everybody? But perhaps for us today, what's more important are the other two aspects. Autonomy. Are we genuinely including our learners as active participants in this learning conversation? And relatedness. Is our subject speaking to everybody or not? And again, if we move on, the next slide, thank you, Ruth. Another motivational theory, expectancy value theory. Again, a lot of work going on around expectation. Do students expect to be successful? And self-efficacy, do we make our subject easier to make it more accessible? Lots of conversations going on around that with the new GCSE. But perhaps more significantly, again, for us today, is about this notion of value. How valuable is our subject to everybody? How worthwhile is it? And I think we as language educators with a commitment to social justice and anti-racist practice, we would want to focus and shine the spotlight on just those aspects. But are we asking the students? Are we including them and their families in these conversations about what we want to teach, how we want to teach it, to make sure that we are working with and for everyone? That's me done. So very, very sort of brief view there of some theories that you can go back to explore in a little bit more depth, and which might support you if you find yourself in a situation where you are having to convince others that this work, this reflection, and this reaction is necessary and needed. Lots there to support you with your arguments for these explorations.
At UCL IOE, and this is also an element of exploring relatedness and representation in languages teaching in a couple of London schools. I think one of the things, the factors that is really contributive to the way that we approach anti-racist practice in London schools, we're already at an advantage in a way because we have a phenomenal range of learners and perhaps a broader range of representation amongst teaching staff. I know there's a lot of work to be done still there. So just to give you a brief background, Ruth, would you mind just sharing my slide again? So I asked one of my student teachers, Faiza Boui, who is a French speaker of North African origin, to do some work with some of the students in her school, which is Girls' School Parliament Hill in Camden. And I also did some work with Khaled Rabai, who is a French teacher of Tunisian origin at Frederick Bremer School in Waltham Forest. So both of them very diverse backgrounds. The pupils themselves represent, I asked them what they considered their own cultural heritage to be. And some of them kind of interpreted that as their linguistic heritage, and some of them interpreted that as their racial heritage. So it was quite an interesting combination, but it varied from Finnish, Italian, a couple of Bangladeshi students, Colombian, Israeli, Mexican, Argentinian, Brazilian, Argentinian, Russian, Ethiopian, British, Asian, Jamaican, Pakistani, African Caribbean, and African Somali. So as you can see, a huge range. And perhaps my favourite was one of the girls said, well, my mum's from Sweden and Switzerland, and she's a bit French, and my dad's Greek and a bit Ukrainian. So I think it's really interesting already to see what they interpret their own backgrounds to be, and how often do they get asked about what their own perception is of who they are and their language and cultural heritage. So that was really fascinating. I am going to see if I can share these. Now, one of them is slightly, you have to really, really listen hard. I did want the students' voices themselves to be heard because I think that's really important. So this group of students were from Frederick Bremer School. And they are speaking, I suppose, what's in academic terms referred to as multicultural London English, I believe. And I think it's really important that we also recognise the diversity that they have in their English language speaking, as well as their speaking of foreign languages. So I'm just going to see if I can share this now. Share sound, yes. If you bear with me a moment, let me get these up. It's not that one, it's this one. So I'm hoping you are going to have to listen very carefully, but they responded to those questions on the slide.
There's some cultures that represent, I don't really look out for it, I don't try to find it, but I can see it. I can kind of see the country mentioned, the holidays. I look for my culture, but I don't really see it around that much.
I don't really mind because I don't really pay much attention to it.
I would like to see it, but it's not a must. Speak more about where people come from. We don't have to learn a language, but we can learn in French, about that country. So, even just to, not even just have a whole period about it, just having a slideshow about countries. So
I remember one of my lessons, there was something about Tunisia.
I dropped down this about different countries and not just France and Germany.
What if more countries are learning school, it's better learning and better chances to learn more new stuff.
Okay, so that was the Frederick Bremer children. Parliament Hill is a little bit clearer, the recording's a bit better, so I'm just going to play that one for you as well.
One activity, which was the Kismari Kill with countries, I saw both Finland and Italy on there, and I don't know, I thought that was funny that Finland was there because it's barely ever anywhere.
Yeah, I feel in the lessons sometimes there's a text in the on the worksheet talking about a country I'm from or a food that I like. I wouldn't mind if it was any about that.
I feel it's not very represented as the Spanish that people learn here. It's mostly from Spain and it's not very Latin American, and it's very, 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 very different it's very different, and it's not very common to learn. I wish that I could hear more about my country as people like to recognize my country and be oh, I know Colombia because I learned it in school, oh, I want to go to Colombia. And I feel teachers by that can also start learning more about different countries.
It's not represented in my lessons, but I wish it could be more represented and more recognized.
I feel it's not represented as much right now, but I have been seeing some more representation, but hopefully in the future there will be some more.
At the start of some of those lessons we did those quizzes about France. Maybe we could also do it about other countries.
Have different cultures represented in the lesson throughout the whole year.
I feel they can add more pictures of all how countries are, how people are.
So maybe in the Spanish lessons, instead of only teaching about Spanish Spain traditions, they could also do other Hispanic countries.
like from Latin America or like just in general. Yeah, so in French as well, it's not just France, but maybe other countries in Africa that speak French as well. It would be like good because people that are from there would feel more represented. I think teachers could like try like give us activities about cultural heritage.
Well, there could be a topic about other countries and learn how to say where you're from and about different languages, but I think we did do that a bit in Year 8.
Maybe we can focus on different countries and cultures that speak the same language or like different variations of languages, because it's important for everyone to see like their own cultures in lessons.
Okay, so I'm just going to tie up there really by sort of hoping that you were able to get the richness that I found. Hugely edited. There were so many good contributions, but I think that, you know, some of the ideas that my colleagues have already touched on about, you know, could it be a whole day? Is it important? The girl who said it's not important, I don't really look for it, was also the one who said, oh yeah, I do remember seeing Tunisia. So, you know, it's always really fascinating to kind of analyse those responses a little bit more. But they all felt that there was already some there. So I think, that obviously that last comment was there's always more to be done, which of course we need to remember and bear in mind. But it was really fascinating, and it's something that I'd really like to continue working with the pupils to develop their ideas and attitudes to how they feel about their cultures being represented. Thank you.
I think that's me now, Ruth, is it?
It's Kerry, yeah.
So we thought, thank you, Camilla. I thought that was really, really interesting. We thought it'd be really useful to just draw your attention to some opportunities which will allow your learners to be engaged and perhaps raise motivation. You may be aware of these, but you may not. So Manchester Metropolitan, they run a mother tongue, other tongue competition. You may well be aware of the Stephen Spender Trust and the great work that goes on there with Charlotte Ryland, and the idea of the multilingual aspect of our classrooms and the celebration that can be had by entering those competitions. So the rules are quite simple, that you translate into English from any language. So you can translate from French or Farsi, from Spanish to Somali, and you can win prizes. And finally, there is also an Anthea Bell Prize, which is slightly more specific, fewer languages involved there, but it's still another opportunity to alert your learners and to engage your learners with opportunities of translation.
I think that's Caroline. So really just sort of in conclusion and to come full circle, this comes back to, the mention I made of Jean Ruddock and the work that she did with Michael Fielding. But this is a great quote. This idea of checking whether the topics permitted for discussion in schools are ones that students see as significant, and whether the discussions are occasions for genuine dialogue in which students can speak without fear of retaliation. So making genuine spaces to ask the questions, to hear the answers, and to respond to what we hear. Initiatives that seek student opinion on matters identified, framed, and articulated solely by researchers or teachers, or that invite comment on issues that students see as important and that do not lead to action or discussion of possible courses of action, are unlikely to be seen as credible. And I think that goes back to this idea of there was a big push on student voice during the mid-2000s. There will be things in schools that allow schools to say, we do that. We have student councils. But the question really is, in our classrooms, do we ask the learners enough and respond to what we hear to really, really make changes, to make a difference? And I think that's really key. So a nice final quote there that really sort of summarises what we as a group thought about when we sat together and discussed making changes. At the end of the presentation, there are now a few slides that give you more background on the Stephen Spender Trust. This competition stays open until the end of July. So that one is included. The Anthea Bell has closed now, but that one sits there. So it's still not too late in these last few weeks if you wanted to do something. And this year's work, each year they shine the spotlight on a particular language. Last year it was Ukrainian, this year Portuguese. So lots of ideas there for you. We wanted to give you practical examples to support you in this work as well. So I think that's it from our team. Thank you very much for listening, and go forth and make changes is what we would say, because the students are telling us it's happening, but we'd like to see more.
Thank you so much. And are we listening? Caroline, Ruth, Camilla, Kerry, thank you so much. By centering the pupils' voices there, you bring us back to the reason we're all here in the room today, our pupils. And also by listening to their voices, you remind us how far ahead of us with this work they often are. Thank you so much for sharing your work. I'm now going to hand over to Vanessa, Elaine, Hannah and Naomi, who will talk about why and how teachers decolonize their languages classrooms. Thank you.
Hi, am I the first? I think I'm the first to speak. Good morning, everyone. Elaine Huggett, Noah Hill High School, Pinner Harrow, suburbs of London. I think that before we can begin to decolonize the languages curriculum, I think that we need to have certain conversations with our colleagues. And I think at least 3 questions should be asked. And we need to make sure that all members of our department faculties and the school indeed understand what we mean by decolonizing the languages curriculum. Next one, Naomi, please. So what does decolonizing the languages curriculum mean? Well, the answer I give is that the languages curriculum, and indeed the school curriculum as a whole, as it exists presently, gives only a partial and predominantly Eurocentric view of the languages we teach and the curriculum we teach. And it's only a partial and Eurocentric view of the world as it was, the world as it is. And it largely ignores the part that the global majority has played in the countries of the languages and countries we study and the world. Now, the word decolonize is potentially in itself very challenging for some people. My personal attitude initially is that other terms can be used other than decolonize. So if colleagues have a problem with that term, I think other terms could be used. But I don't think what I do not think can be denied is that we are only giving our students a partial reality. Next slide, please. And as to why we need to decolonize the languages curriculum and the school curriculum, it's as I said, the answer is simply we cannot continue to give partial and half-truths to our students. Our students need to have a full, truthful understanding of the languages and cultures of the countries that we are studying. And there is another question that, perhaps should be asked, but which is, I think, why are we studying French, German, Spanish, Latin, ancient Greek? Why are we studying these languages? But maybe that's a question too far. It depends on where your school is presently. But so we can leave that one aside for a moment. So perhaps the most challenging thing, once one has got over the what is this decolonizing the languages curriculum question has been answered, and the why question, the how question is also very, very challenging. And if my colleagues are going to say a lot about that, but if I could just say very quickly that there is a wealth of information out there, and but what is needed is a lot of time. But if one doesn't have, and I know how busy teachers are, if one doesn't have an awful lot of time, there are some things that one can do very, very quickly. I think the first thing that one should be doing with our year sevens is to explain to them why French, German, Spanish are spoken in so many different countries all over the world. And that will get us into some quite deep and important questions very early on. And, most of us, or many of us, are very, very lucky to be living in multicultural areas with multicultural, multiracial classrooms. And we need to use our students. In my classroom recently, we did some work on the area in which we live, and then after we studied Pinner and London, we looked at the area, the different places our parents and grandparents came from. So we now have a display talking about North Africa, the Caribbean, Asia, other places in Europe. So they are, the GCSE is about our students, their lives, their experiences, their hopes and fears, and so on. And they are our most important resources. We can look at our books, and I'm not saying, I think a lot of the texts have improved tremendously in recent years, but they're not there yet. But even when the text that we are using isn't what we would like it to be, we can look at unacceptable presentations and stereotypic presentations and discuss those with our students. YouTube, I've used YouTube to talk about patois and Creole with my students. Our universities and our institutions are doing tremendous work. Next week for Diversity Week, I've done a presentation for the faculty about influential Europeans. People probably didn't know were Black. If your school is only dealing with Black History Month in terms of decolonizing the curriculum, you may want to talk about the ending of slavery and the part that Haiti played in that, and Toussaint Louverture. But I'll stop there. I'm sure my colleagues have a lot more to say.
Thank you, Elaine. I'm going to start off next just giving a few examples of how we've implemented this in our own curriculum in our school. My name's Hannah Purdy, and I'm a French and Spanish teacher at Wellington School. During my first year at my current school, we had a focus on equality, diversion and inclusion as a whole school approach. So throughout that year, I decided to focus on decolonising the MFL curriculum. I started initially focusing on my year 7 curriculum, reviewing my own resources by conducting an audit, and then this quickly expanded to all year groups. I'm going to share a couple of ways this morning in which I have done this. The first way is the cultural projects. On the screen, you can see a couple of our examples of our cultural projects that have been submitted by our year 7 students. Each year, year 7 students complete a research task. They are asked to research a target language speaking country. At my school, we study French, Spanish and German. So there is a wide variety of languages and projects produced. This project covers things like the country's population, festivals, celebrations, fashion, cuisine and monuments. Students are encouraged to research a wide variety of areas. And as you can see, many of the students choose to research an area outside of Europe. This year, we've received cultural projects from Quebec, Ivory Coast, Haiti, to name just a few. Last year, Year 8 also completed a cultural project in relation to festivals, and this took a similar form. Additionally, when studying the topic of festivals throughout our curriculum, we've spoken about a variety of festivals from target language speaking countries. I've also taught the topic of Ramadan to our students during the period of Ramadan. They have studied key information about Ramadan and how Ramadan is observed in the target language. This has then led on to conversations in relation to the influence of the Arabic language on the Spanish language. This is a great opportunity for students to talk about a wide variety of target languages and different cultures. Next slide, please, Naomi. Each year, we hold multiple events throughout the school calendar, one of which is the World Day of Languages. In tutor time, staff share videos of themselves speaking any languages that they are able to speak. Students who speak a language at home are then invited whether they would like to host a 5-minute taste lesson for the remaining students in Year 7 and 8. Each class in Year 7 and 8 have a period of time off timetable during that day. These activities run as a carousel type of activities, and in previous years we have had up to 18 different languages celebrated during this event. Students prepare and teach their own language and create their own resources. Some focus on language content and others on cultural knowledge. On the screen, I've just put a few selection of the languages that we've had last year. As you can see, these range from Afrikaans to sign language to Urdu, to name just a few. Students really enjoy learning about different cultures and different languages and talking to the students themselves who are able to teach these students. In addition, we also run a similar event for primary schools, and we invite our Year 4 primary school students from our feeder primaries to attend, and we always receive positive feedback following this event. Similarly, one of my colleagues runs a Dia de los Muertos themed event for our annual Project in a Day for our Year 7 students. This looks at Mexican culture and how Dia de los Muertos is celebrated. Next slide, please, Naomi. For World Book Day, we share our passion for literature with students through a variety of class-based activities. My colleagues have also focused on sharing information about a variety of different authors from different target language speaking countries with the students. And on the screen, you can see a couple of examples from Laura Nasfu, Faiza Guen, and Aigen Sybil Chelik. Throughout the year, we practice for the speaking examination through the use of photo cards, and we ensure our photo cards are inclusive and speak about a variety of festivals, target language speaking countries in addition. I have also found the permission to speak Pearson resources really useful throughout the year, and I'm now going to hand over to Vanessa, who will speak more about these resources.
Thank you, Hannah. Yes, well, my classroom is about all diversity and inclusion. My secondary school is Raynes Park. So we do have lots of students coming from Latin America and the Arab countries. So this is why you see my focus in order to create that inclusivity, that inclusion with my students, is making reference to their culture. So in my Year 10 class, I always have an introduction. So when doing the literal practice, they have all these visuals of different Latin American flags, that because amongst my students in Year 10, I do have British students, but also students from Latin America. And I want that inclusivity to actually happen, diversity being celebrated. And I make questions. Does anyone know the flag? Then someone says yes. We start having a bit of a debate. And then I start introducing writers from different countries like Pablo Neruda from Chile, Che Guevara, he's from Argentina, but he had an amazing revolution path in Cuba. So I put all this information, and then Guadalupe Loaesa from Mexico. And that's how I make that celebration of identities, making those connections. And in my Year 11 and 12 classes, I have lots of students from Syria and Morocco. And what I do is make these connections with permission to speak. The resources were very, very useful. I was able to teach how many Arabic heritage we have in our Spanish language. So in a way, it's like telling them and to the whole class that by studying Spanish, they can even understand better their own language and all those connections. So basically, what I'm trying to do in all my lessons, even from year 7, but the examples I'm bringing, year 10, 11, and 12, is my students being in my lessons can not only learn the language, but have these connections with their own language and getting to know themselves even better. So not just learning Spanish, but learning more about themselves. And also with all my Latin American students having, sometimes our curriculum can be too much about Spain, and I want to really celebrate the Hispanic world. So that's what I'm always doing. And it's really working because it makes the class really grow together, become very powerful, that inclusion happens, and the relationships get built, they know each other better. That's what I'm trying. I think it's really, in my school especially, relationships, not just with the teacher, but amongst the students, are very important for their success in their progress with their studies. So that's it. If anything else, but that was my presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much to all our speakers so far this morning. We now have a little bit of time for a Q&A session. We have had a question about hierarchies in the chat, so let's see what's coming up in the next session, which is dismantling the hierarchies, and then maybe come back to that question in our second Q&A session. Additionally, we've had a question from Marina about language offerings. I think, Judith, you came in with a response. I don't know if you want to add anything about your HHCL.
Yes, did you want me to respond to that, Melina?
Maybe you just want to mention what you've posted in the chat there.
Yes, of course. So, Maureen, thank you so much for what you flagged here regarding the perception and representation of languages in languages classroom across England. I just wanted to flag here the NCLE project, so the National Consortium for Languages Education, has amongst one of its aims the HHCL. So the NCLE recognizes the value and importance of all languages and the rich cultural heritage of all our learners, and of course also of the parents, carers, and indeed the wider community. And so NCLE has as one of its aims to promote and support greater access to accreditation through GCSE and other suitable qualifications for home heritage and community languages. Of course, this is not to say that that is the most important thing, to have accreditation, but in terms of the perception of the value of the languages, when it is possible to offer accreditation, then this is also something that often spurs parents and carers on to really see, okay, so this is recognized because my children can get accreditation for their language. And so this is more valued. So that's really important to mention. And another point I think to mention, which is often actually not known, is to remind schools that accreditation in HHCL, so in home heritage and community languages, counts towards the EBAC. Yeah, so this is often a way to get more schools to actually work towards this, because of course they are working towards EBAC. So this is something to mention to them. So I just wanted to highlight that briefly. And with regards to Arabic, because I see, Maureen, you also mentioned Arabic there, and I can put this in the chat. I don't know if you're aware of the Arabic Teacher Council that is led by Luma Hamid. So perhaps that would also be something to have a look at, because that's a really great network. They work very closely also with the Qatar Foundation. And it might be something to just reach out to as well, perhaps just for more information. And I know Katja Pizzi is here as well. And I think she mentioned something about home heritage and community languages. So perhaps, I don't know if you want to jump in as well. But that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Judith. That's really interesting. Thank you. And we've had another question in the chat, which we will go to now. In the meantime, please do continue to post your questions or raise your hand, although we are running slightly over, so we will be starting our session. There is another Q&A session for after those. But from Asma, do teachers feel it is a struggle to include all the lovely projects and topics they're covering whilst trying to meet the needs of the exam spec curriculum? Interested to hear how others, sorry, I've just lost that question now. How others have managed time restrictions, especially this is often raised by SLT as an excuse to sideline this important work. So if any of our speakers want to jump in on that question.
Could I say something very quickly?
Go for it, Elaine.
Yes, thank you. I think it's really important not to see decolonising the languages stroke school curriculum as a matter of a lovely project or a topic. It is absolutely crucial work. The world is the world is decolonised. The world. The truth of the matter is things have been left out rather than the important things have been left in, and it would be nice to add something else. As I said, the GCSE is predominantly about the children. And it's important to use them as a resource and to help them to get through the various topics that we do, to help them to get a better understanding of the countries, of the languages that they are studying. For me, this is really important, that it's not, what we're trying to do is not seen as an add-on, but to matter of redressing the imbalance. And that, I think it can be done. If you look at all the topics that they have to study, it always goes back to them. And if the students in front of you are not students with the rich backgrounds necessarily that some of our students have, then you start with them and then you widen it to other French-speaking or German-speaking or Spanish-speaking countries to see how it relates to those, what we're studying relates to those other countries. But it's important that that teachers recognise that we're not giving our students a full picture.
Thank you so much, Elaine. And let's go to Kerry really quickly. We have reached 15:15, so we will be moving on quick to the next session.
Sorry, Milene, I was going to say exactly the same thing, and I think that was borne out in the comments made by my student teachers. It is a living, breathing. It's what we do every day. It is not a celebration of adding on a couple of cultural festivals, or that it has to underpin the work that we do all the time, and that isn't something that's negotiable with SLT. That is the lens through which we teach our subjects. So, Elaine, exactly. I just wanted to support what you said.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Built in, not bolt on, I think, is Elaine's message and Kerry's message that they've really powerfully shared just then. Okay, so we're now looking to hopefully respond to the question that came up organically in the chat around hierarchies within language provision. It's my absolute delight to introduce Marielle, Ashni, Ro, Cecile, Judith and Maud, who are going to talk about dismantling the hierarchies. Thank you.
Okay, can I be heard here?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, hi everyone. So just to say hello and thanks for all coming today. This is going to be a bit of an interactive session in terms of summarising some of the things that have come up before. We're thinking about asking and responding to and hearing our students, but we're hoping to hear from you guys a little bit, although we only have 15 minutes, so it's quite a short listening project. But if everyone can sort of get that code up and make sure they are able to respond, that will be nice for us all to just look at each other's situations. We're going to kick off basically by asking who you are and what you teach. So we'd like you to answer by saying what you teach and also why you've chosen to come to this session in the first place. What about decolonising the curriculum is interesting to you? Why have you sort of taken your morning off to join us? So if you can answer those two questions, hopefully using that Mentimeter, that would be really good. And we can start off by looking at the responses to that as they come in. This is, a quick hello from all of us. This is the group that have organised this, this 15 minutes, basically. That's the title of our session, Dismantling Hierarchies of Language Education. And we will talk about what that's going to mean a bit further on. The objectives will be sort of, the idea of the whole session is to share our understanding of dismantling hierarchies and how it might relate to decolonising, share a bit of practice between us and obviously the participants here, and discuss some of the challenges that we have encountered in our strategies in the classroom. So hopefully we could all share that and we can use participants of this session to share with each other. So some of the questions hopefully might be organically answered. So yeah, who's in the room in terms of the first question? If everyone can tap in to answer that question, that will be really nice. So kind of like what you teach and maybe why you're here. We'll wait a few minutes. Hopefully it'll be quick enough so that we can, yeah, great. As they come in. I guess this is also a strategy you can use in your classrooms in getting to know your students and understanding how, where people are coming from. You can choose different questions to bring them in. Great. Lovely. So what we also want to know is, well, we might have another slide for the next part, but we kind of want to know why you're interested in decolonising. So I wonder if you're able to add that in.
I can just do the next slide, Cecile, if you like.
Yeah,
that works for you. Yeah.
Wow, what's this? This looks good.
Okay, so what do you want to take away from this session? Can you just really short in 70 seconds, write down what you would like to take away from today's session? I can see some answers. It's looking really nice. We've got 18 seconds left. I'm hoping that everybody's okay with their typing on their phones or on their second screen that they have available to them. Okay, so obviously there's no correct answer. So we've got food for thought, ideas for enriching everyday lessons with diversity, ideas for practice and friends. Love to know about the bridge divide between research and schools. Learn from my colleagues. Yeah, we've got a couple of bits at the bottom. So basically the Mentimeter will collect everyone's answers and then we will create a file for you at the end. May we get the next slide, please? Okay, so get ready, everyone. Another typing one. Okay, so what do you understand by hierarchies in language education in your own context? We have 60 seconds here. There's also a possibility to skip the question if you would rather not answer. Well, we've got 30 seconds left. Oh, thank you, Elaine. No problem at all. We'll take all answers and we'll just collate them at the end. Nice. French, German, and Spanish being centered. Lovely. Okay, so obviously no correct answer. Those who are in control that determine the curriculum, dominance of European languages, yes. What languages are taught? The language of one country being more valuable than or more correct than the language of another country. Spanish being the most important. Lovely, thank you so much. May I get the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, and you can skip this one as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what are the barriers for dismantling hierarchies in your own professional context? What do you think they could be? There are many. Mentimeter rejected my answer as well. That's strange. I made sure that that would not happen. I'm very sorry, Caroline. That should not have happened. Okay, there are 20 seconds left. Thank you for being understanding. Okay. So, the lack of teacher autonomy, my own knowledge, time constraints, absolutely. Lack of representation in languages department, pressure from curriculum, yes. Good question. Senior leaders who say they don't have the time. Challenge to change historical education and educational structures. Willingness of the people involved, absolutely. Neoliberalism, white male, etc. Privilege, absolutely. These are some absolute brilliant answers. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll be passing over to Judith.
Thank you so much. So just briefly, one of the terms that we thought that was important to briefly introduce is the term intersectionality. So this is a term that a couple of years ago, I remember I was speaking to a group of students, and afterwards I got the feedback that this was a really, really helpful term when thinking about decolonizing the curriculum. So what is intersectionality? So intersectionality has its roots in Black feminist theory, and it really describes the double discrimination of racism and sexism faced by Black women. So that was the root of this term. The term was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw already in 1989. And she was critiquing the single axis framework in discrimination law. So, for example, that Black women, when they were making a case, they had to choose whether this was a sexism case or a racism case. So she brought about this term, and this term was then developed further. I just briefly want to quote her. She summarizes very well here what intersectionality means and how she has coined it. So the quote is, intersectionality is a metaphor for understanding multiple ways or multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage, and that continue to compound themselves and create obstacles that are not often understood by any conventional ways of thinking. Now, the term intersectionality was then developed further, and researchers have picked this up to then think about how there are multiple axes of discrimination. So can you think of different ways in which these compound themselves? So if we're thinking about multiple forms of discrimination, which ones might you think? You might want to write in the chat. So Annie, I can see loads of people typing. Yes, so we've got racism, sexism. Yes, really important. Disability, one that is sadly often forgotten. Yes, absolutely. Homophobia, gender. Yes, absolutely. LGBTQ plus issues, social disadvantage. Yes, class, a really important one also. Have you thought about age? That's one that is also often forgotten. Yeah. So here we can see how these compound, and that's why the term intersectionality can be quite useful. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk about some suggestions that we can, some ideas and some starting places for where we can start to talk about hierarchies in schools and ideas that you can use in the classroom, perhaps. So, Ro, are we sharing Maud's audio clip here as she talks about the survey, or shall I go?
Just go ahead, my dear. Just go ahead.
Okay. So, Maud has created a survey that she uses with her pupils to talk about what languages they speak at home, their community languages, and this is then used to form part of the cultural diversity of the school. Maud also mentioned that she found from this survey some pastoral problems that came. She found out about some pastoral issues that were raised from this, which was a really good starting point of how having all this diversity and having a survey that showcases the diversity in schools can give us lots of different responses. Some ideas then that I'm going to share, because really Maud was going to talk about the survey. As a starting point, when year 7 are new, you can use this survey. use that then to inform your teaching, but also allow pupils to give mini lessons in their home language. They can be grouped depending on how many people speak the same language. They can introduce themselves just as we teach them to do using the European languages that we teach. But this will then give our learners a sense of pride in sharing their cultural diversity, their background, teaching their peers greetings, sharing festivals, celebrations and experiences that they have in their lives, and also promoting the school community. Following on from that, you are celebrating cultural differences within the school community. Another idea is that you can create a culture calendar, maybe even have a team of students who write a newsletter, a web blast, or a video newsletter where they share details, images, experiences of their culture, the celebrations, their food. You can have a different topic each month that they use. And this, again, is a step towards dismantling the hierarchy so that we're not just focusing on the European languages within our classrooms and in our school communities, but also being inclusive to the pupils that we are teaching.
So that is the survey. And if we can go to the next slide as well, please. And we'll share everything with you at the end. But yeah, there's just some food for thought and some ideas. But thank you so much, everyone, for your time.
Thank you so much. Huge thanks there to Maria, Ashni, Rose, Cecile, Judith, and Maud for sharing findings of your work in practice with us. And we really look forward to you sharing the results of our collaborative contributions to your questions around hierarchization of languages and how to disrupt that system. Thank you so much. So I'm going to now introduce Caroline and Nadine and Rachel, who are going to be talking about decolonising secondary languages, tensions and opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you. I just need to share my screen, she says. Talk amongst yourselves. Is that now working? Fabulous. Beautiful. Thank you so much for that lovely slide. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining our conference today and for joining this session on decolonising secondary classics, tensions and opportunities. I am Rachel Wright. I'm the head of languages at Ellen Wilkinson School for Girls in West London. I'm joined by Caroline Bristow, the director of the Cambridge Schools Classics Project. Nadine Lewis isn't able to be here in person, but she has helped us plan and prepare this session. She is an MFL and Latin teacher at Noah Hill High School. So firstly, I thought we'd think about why are we talking about ancient languages in essentially a modern languages context? Well, I am a very fortunate head of department in that we have 3 modern languages in my department, French, Spanish and German, but we also have Latin. So Latin can sometimes sit under an MFL department, but it can also sometimes come in a history department or in some schools, a whole classics department standing alone. For me, as a head of MFL who's over the last few years been on a journey in terms of trying to decolonize our curriculum and our teaching practice, and that experience having been incredibly inspiring and powerful, I was relating strongly to lots of the examples and things we discussed earlier in the conference, talking about the importance of engagement of students and how students seeing themselves represented in the languages curriculum is so important, vital, and particularly in the context of optional languages, budget constraints, time constraints, engagement and motivation, something brilliantly discussed earlier, is super important. And for me, although I did study Latin at school, I'm not a Latin teacher, and I really didn't know how to approach this with Latin. But having met Caroline, having learned an incredible amount from her, myself, my Latin teachers feel journey with Latin, and Bristol.
I lost you at the end ever so slightly.
I put a couple of questions on that. Oh, am I back?
Yep, you're back.
Am I back? Okay. Yeah, a little thing just flashed up on my internet connection. It should be fine. Fingers crossed. Normally it's fine here. So essentially, yes. So there are lots of common challenges and opportunities between MFL and classical languages in terms of looking at the decolonisation agenda. And I'd say not to the sort of what's come up a lot this morning is the idea of the challenge and issues around the Eurocentrism with our languages. And of course, with classics, there is inherent tension within that, of course, right from the start. So I'm going to hand over to Caroline and enjoy.
Good morning. So as my little tiny thing on the screen says, I am the director of the Cambridge School Classics Project. For those of you who have probably never ever heard of us, we are a classical languages and classics education project which has existed for over 50 years, and we publish a textbook. I am very deliberately not going to talk about textbook writing. The reason for that is not because this is not a decolonisation process. One of the things that really got me into thinking about this was writing a textbook, but also because I am very, very aware that I publish a textbook. I mean, my salary depends on the sales of a textbook. You know, that's how we fund our educational work. And so in a space like this, I prefer to lead with theory and practice and that kind of thing. If you have questions about how one looks at curriculum and does that assessment process in a 15-minute talk, I wanted to leave that out because I wanted to sort of not look like I'm just trying to sell a textbook, because sometimes that can look a little bit dodgy. So I'd like to start us off with the fact that let's give everybody who's ever done classics in the room an existential crisis. Because essentially we are the OG of all of the issues that you guys have been talking about. The name is a problem in and of itself. Essentially, the very name of our subject is imbued with a linguistic hierarchy. We are, I mean, the bottom box is taken, literally it's the opening paragraph, second paragraph, sorry, from Wikipedia. We are considered to be the foundation of the humanities and has traditionally been the cornerstone of a typical European elite education. Here we go. There's the problem. Sorted. We are literally all of the issues that MFL has, classics has, only kind of worse, because we directly kind of caused all of the issues that you guys have got. So sorry about that. Wasn't me though. But yeah, sorry. These are two slightly long quotes, but I like to quote things in full because I think that these people put these so much better than I could. Essentially, this is highlighting what the issue is. Rebecca Futu-Kennedy writes a fantastic blog called Classics of the Intersections. I really recommend her work. But she puts this really well. And she basically says that classics completely ignores the communities around the Latin and Greek speaking world. Even within the European world, it differentiates between Greek and Latin speakers and the rest of the world, unless, as she points out brilliantly, one of these cultures can be used as an antecedent for a sort of 18th to 21st century British, German, French national identity. And I think her final paragraph puts this really well. Interesting, claims upon the classical seem to coincide with the rise of the nation state in Europe. Essentially, and I say this a lot in my professional life, we have a lot to blame the Victorians for in classics. And Emily Greenwood, who is a scholar of classics, basically also echoes exactly the same kind of point. But she goes at a slightly different angle and points out that the civilizational authority of Greece and Rome is aligned with the civilizations with modern European colonialism. And I just want to kind of highlight what that looked like in practice. These are two examples. For example, so there's quote at the top. Keith Sanderford and Brian Stoddart in their book, they highlight that colonialism was essentially a practice of the British Empire taking cricket, classics and Christianity to the rest of the world. The Indian Civil Service one of the most prestigious government postings available in the Victorian period, didn't require you to know any languages spoken in India, but it did require you to have excellent marks in Latin. That was literally a requirement to work in the Indian civil service under the British Empire. We then also have, Philip Mason is an Indian civil servant who wrote a memoir, and the second quote underneath that heading is from an academic article looking at the intersection of classics and the Indian civil service. Then we have the education in the West Indies. Essentially, Austin Clarke's memoirs of his school days in Barbados, growing up stupid under the Union Jack. I think this is a fantastic quote where he talks about his mother wanting him to be a doctor. To be a doctor, you had to know Latin backwards and forwards. You had to be a Latin fool. The only way to save yourself from sort of a low-paying, low-class role was to adopt a Western educational standpoint. So having just depressed everyone and hopefully given everybody who's ever taught or studied classics and existential crisis, I want to actually answer the question, can you even decolonize classics? Is that even possible? And there are plenty of people within my discipline who would say no. Actually, they are sort of in a camp that's very burn it down and very kind of can get very hostile. Personally, I think you can decolonize it, but that is something where plenty of people on Twitter will come for me. You know, like it is a split. I think that it's important to have an awareness of the discipline's history. I think we need to interrogate how this history has affected our curriculum and our canon, what choices we are making and what choices our teachers made, because there's a real tendency for us to teach what we were taught and how we were taught it. And I think that's across all disciplines. And we also need to interrogate ourselves, our positionality, there we go, and the positionality of our sources. So just for the last little bit of this, having depressed everyone, I'd like to actually model what decolonisation could actually look like. So for starters, seeing what is actually there, not what you expect to see. So this is a map of the Roman Empire, stolen shamelessly from our textbooks. It meant I didn't have to clear any image permissions. Please note the area covered by that empire. The idea that all the people within it were white is insane, and yet incredibly prevalent. If you look at older pictures of the classical world from the 1800s, they are all painted with white people in them, unless it's someone who's enslaved. Which is, again, please look at the geographical area. The statue on the left is the statue of Emperor Septimus Severus. Septimus Severus, this is highlights here a problem we have. Lots of the statues and the illustrations we have from this period are marble. They were originally painted, they weren't white, but they have created this sense of whiteness. And it's been shown repeatedly in studies that if you present a student with like a line drawing that hasn't got any colour in it, they supply whiteness. Even if the student is not white, their context is not white, the moment you're talking about the Greeks and Romans, they supply white. The reality of Septimus Severus can be seen on the right-hand side of the page, on the top tondo. That is the Emperor Septimus Severus. He's African. That is a contemporary image of him and his imperial family. He's black. And yet, when you see reconstructions of this emperor, very, very few of them lean properly into that melanin level. How we work this out, having said I'm not going to talk about our textbook, the one thing I will raise, the guy on the bottom, on the right of the screen is Barbilus. Barbilus is a character who's been in these textbooks for 50 years. He is based on, very loosely, so loosely, any more loosely he would fall off, but he is basically based on a Greco-Syrian individual. When he was drawn in the original textbooks, he was drawn with fully Caucasian features. He was indistinguishable from anybody else. He lives in Egypt with Greco-Syrian heritage in the stories. The idea that he would be completely Caucasian is bizarre. So when we redrew the textbooks, we redrew and recast Barbilus, if you will. He's actually based on, but he's based on real pictures and artwork from the region. Because one of the things that some textbooks do is, and this is something to look out for, when they draw people of colour, they actually draw white people with the different melanin level. And this is something that was pointed out to me by a fantastic scholar, teacher, a black classics teacher in the US called John Bracey, fabulous man. And he pointed this out to me, that this happens, and now I can't unsee it every time I see it. And it's my privilege showing that I had never noticed that was happening. John sums up the problem with the classical world when he says the reason he became a classics teacher is he realized that classics was hiding black people. He is a teacher of classics because he wants to remind people that people of color existed forever and didn't just all run away from the Roman Empire or something. That's not a thing that happened. And I think it's really important to recognize that our subject needs decolonizing as a sort of concept, but actually is global. So it should actually be not a complex process to decolonize it in that way. We've already got the world represented. We just need to think about how we're working with it. So other things to consider if you are teaching these topics. Rome and the Roman Empire. This is a particular problem with Rome rather than Greece. Oh, it's referred to as a civilizing force. The idea that the Romans rock up and suddenly they have all of this stuff that's much better than the indigenous population stuff, and the whole place Romanizes. You will see this in textbooks, you will see this in documentaries, you will see this in movies, you will see it basically everywhere. That is what needs to be interrogated. And one can do this by thinking about what culture existed before the Romans turned up, which is not something people often do. We think of the Romans as the culture we're studying. No, you're studying a cultural interaction, not a cultural domination. Well, you are studying a cultural domination, but you need to recognize that's what it is. Whose voices are we hearing? Do we actually believe them? Who is missing? Who is not recorded in the record? What texts are you using? These have often been shaped, especially from the Victorian period, on imperial agendas. So you have an awful lot of Tacitus talking about conquering the primitive cultures. I can't think why the British schooling system privileged those during the Victorian period. But we seem to just not be interrogating that and continuing to do that. So maybe we could stop doing that. We also need to recognise that we are not teaching our students to be Romans. That sounds ridiculous, but the amount of students who think that when you said the Romans did a thing, they think you mean, and that was okay because it was the Romans. They kind of identify with the culture whose language they're learning. And so actually, it's really important to stress to them, the Romans were awful. I love studying them. I've devoted my life to studying this subject. I adore studying them. They were awful people. I mean, probably not on an individual level. There were probably some quite nice ones. But like as a culture, they were not doing good things. I mean, the buildings are pretty. There's some nice art. Bloomin' love me the literature sometimes. But the whole enslavement and conquering the world thing, not really something I endorse with my students. And just to highlight again how this looks in practice, we talk a lot about Roman Britain. If we bring this into a British context, if I can be forgiven for having a very British-centric moment, because I've just written a book that has this content in it, so it's very fresh. We talk about Roman Britain. The period is called Roman Britain. Well, for an awful lot of the British in this period, they did not care that the Romans had turned up. Certainly, I saw some Welsh in the chat earlier. The Welsh really didn't care. We have continuation of the Iron Age settlements. The Welsh basically told the Romans to op it quite effectively. So did the Scottish. I also saw some Scots in the chat, and quite a bit of the north of England, actually. The southeast of England seems to have been pretty Roman. But even there, when the Romans leave, the British just go, oh, that was an interesting experiment. And they just completely demolish all of the Roman culture that's in the country. This is not a country where this civilizing force turned up and everyone went, oh, that seems like a much better idea. We're all going to do that now. That's not what happened historically. And yet when we talk about it, we can lean into this idea that the Romans turned up and completely changed the nature of the entire place. And this is also something that when you MFL is talking about more recent or modern empires, we lean into that as well. We think that these empires turn up and then suddenly, like Joe Bloggs, who's selling his sheep, has completely changed his world. No, he hasn't. He doesn't care. He is exactly the same as he was before they turned up. He just might be using different money, you know? And so to highlight the problems that this has with our sources, we have a translation of Caesar's Gallic Wars. It's an incredibly famous passage. I've seen it in multiple exam board syllabuses. And also, I've seen it quoted in places, and it's often quoted as an example and evidence for the fact that the Druids burnt people in wicker men. Yes, that's where the movie came from. That is how pernicious this is. This is written by Caesar, who's literally invading the Gauls and murdering them. And he's got a little bit of an agenda, tiny bit. And he is pretty much the only person who ever tells us that they burn people in wicker men. And yet, just blithely, people have been saying the Druids did human sacrifice in massive wicker men and burnt people alive, including the innocent. I mean, it maybe happened, but possibly we should actually think about this a little bit more. The images on the right, we have a roundhouse, which is an Iron Age settlement. Again, it's often depicted that the Romans turn up, everyone starts living in villas. No, they didn't. We've got historical evidence that shows the contemporaneous building of roundhouses alongside Roman-style stone buildings, for example, in the ditches in Gloucestershire. And Aquae Sulis, Sulis Minerva from Bath, is often depicted as being this wonderful syncretism. We focus on Roman Bath. That was a British sacred site before the Romans turned up. Sulis is probably a British deity. And actually, we need to think about what this is. This is cultural imperialism. This is not a beautiful kind of, lovely melding together of cultures. This is the Romans coming in, taking a British sacred site, completely changing its nature and absorbing it in. This is not a neutral or kind process. So just to finish off, think about your receptions. Think about how classics is used. Think about how your students are encountering it. The image on the left is a painting done during the Victorian period, and it's literally entitled Neptune Ceding Control of the Seas to Britannia. There's so much that I could say about that, but I'm just going to leave it on the screen. We've then got on the right-hand side, the White House. Trump literally brought into effect an executive order, I think it was, or probably was, it was Trump, whereby he said that all civic buildings had to be built in accordance with the aesthetics of Greece and Rome, because they are the highest form of civic pride, essentially. Let's interrogate that as well. And finally, use people like, so Derek Walcott is a fantastic poet from the Caribbean. And he grew up with a classical education, and it really imbues his work. There's a huge tradition of classical reception within the Caribbean literature tradition, and also the South American, especially in the Spanish-speaking world, because of the colonialism in that region and how it affected their education systems. And there's an awful lot of reclamation and kind of reforming their interactions with this material. There are some fantastic scholars who have written on this, who aren't me. I will point people to their work quite happily, but it's a really interesting way to get students to think about how that cultural interaction works. So finally, how do we actually decolonize classics? Well, by actually recognizing that Latin and classics do not need to be a sign of an elite education, studied by the right sort of people, a badge of honor, special, I love my subject, we're not special, or civilizing. All of these narratives need to die, but it doesn't mean that Latin and classics aren't worthy of studying. Those are not the reasons we study them. And if they are the reasons you're studying them, that's some inner work to be done rather than by the discipline. And I think I ran over by 4 minutes, and I'm really sorry.
Thank you so much to our last two groups. I'm sorry for those reminders to wrap up, Caroline, because that was absolutely fascinating. We've got our second Q&A now. So please do raise your hand in the chat if you would like to ask speakers some questions. I think I'll pose two questions from the chat first. So we had one, do you link your work with ethnic minority Saturday evening schools? And the second one was, agree that it should be built in, not bolted on. Any practical examples of how to do this? And I suppose that question speaks to our dilemma with how do we speak the language of SLT that's come up a couple of times? And if they won't listen, how do we force them? So I'll hand over to our speakers if anybody wants to jump in on either of those.
If I could speak actually on the, because
Intentionally, I made sure I didn't have a chance to speak during the dismantling hierarchies thing, because I really wanted to center the practitioners in the room, right? But at least up here in Scotland, I do have like friends who are other PhD students who do work with complementary schools, and so much of what I like do up here with my own research with secondary school teachers here in Scotland is asking them that exact same question, like, how are you coordinating with complementary schools? And it's questions like, is the mainstream school giving complementary schools a space to host? There's research here and reports being done here on the retention of minority ethnic teachers here in Scotland, right? And how are we making sure that we are, title explains it, retaining minority ethnic teachers. And beyond that, I know there's work with GTCS, the General Teaching Council of Scotland, about even things like translating teaching licenses that were that were achieved in other countries, and making sure that they can also teach here, right? There's remit for them. So making sure there's a diverse academic background in that. So really it is about like sharing space, at least in my experience and what I've gotten from the teachers and the other academics that I work with, if that answers that question.
Yeah, thank you, Marielle. Do any of our other speakers want to jump in on those questions? Okay, in that case, I think we're back on track, and maybe we can, unless there's any hands up in the participants list that I've missed, I can't see any. So in that case, we may be ready to hand over to Lisa for our next steps.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you. I'm still reeling in the content of the last presentation, and actually how powerfully that message landed about the very foundations of our subject being problematic. So how can we unentwine, is that a word, de-entwine ourselves from the paradigms of power and privilege that exist and are perpetuated through our subject, when it is the makeup of our subject, right? Our subjects started with a colonial mission, right? And that complicates things. But I think as Caroline and Rachel spoke to really clearly, it doesn't make us devoid of, it just sharpens our intentions here, right? And supports the point of leaning into this. It was interesting to hear that all of the issues that exist in classics, of course, exist within modern foreign languages, starting with the name of our subject. Modern foreign are problematic terms that we all need to challenge as well. So just huge thanks for that. Just speaking to Kerry Bevan's discussion about the importance of representation in teaching materials, also picking up on Vanessa Fonseca's point about where she spoke to using Pearson resources. Just a reminder that our group have been working together to co-write and write resources in decolonizing and anti-racist resources in French, German and Spanish, or through French, German and Spanish, around a range of issues, as you can see on the board, social justice, climate justice, and its links with anti-racism, art, European Day of Languages through a decolonizing lens, and the resource that Vanessa spoke to earlier, the Islamic influence on language and culture in Spain, Germany and France, and on the languages. Just a reminder that those resources are there freely available. The most recent resource, this is hot off the press, is on graphic novels and language learning, and showcases my favourite graphic novel of all time, Eye of Yop City. Really recommend you engaging with that. As with all of these resources, there are explanations in English, and then activities that you can do with your teachers can do with their pupils, Key Stage 3 and 4 pupils, in the lesson or as homework, or however it works. So all that remains for me to say is just an enormous thank you. Thank you for your engagement today. This is not easy stuff, and that's how we know it's meaningful. I thank you for for all the delegates, for your engagement, for your contributions in the chat, and for leaning into the discomfort. Enormous thank you to the speakers today who have been working over the course of many months. This event was first conceived of as a group back in December, so we've been working for many months on producing this for you, and just enormous thank you to them for sharing their expertise and time today. If you're interested in joining us with this work, please do remember to email and come on board. We don't require any particular expertise. What we require is just a willingness to interrogate and to disrupt the racism that shows up within ourselves and our subject. Huge thank you to the Institute for Languages, Cultures and Societies for hosting us today, to Lisa and Claire, our sketchnoters. I'm so intrigued to see what this looks like in a sketch note. I'm so intrigued by that. And there was a question in the chat about sharing of slides. We will hopefully get the PDF versions, I think, of colleagues' slides. We can share them out on the website. I'm going to, on the ALL website, I'm going to be honest, I haven't seen the 24 new messages in the chat. I apologise, but I will ask speakers if they may stay, if they're able to stay on for another couple of moments, and just thank you so much for joining us.